this little coupe conquered the World Rally Championship and showed that all-wheel drive was not just for the big SUV off-roaders. It could be for every family. This is the Audi Quattro. Like all good European automakers, Auto Union was bought out by Volkswagen, and in 1969 was turned into Audi. And they had some pretty good success. Volkswagen used them to make a bunch of prototypes like the Audi 50, aka the Volkswagen Golf, and a little prototype for the German military called the Iltis. In 1977, the Iltis was used in the German military as an all-wheel drive off-road military transport vehicle. And Audi's chassis engineer, Georg Bensinger, watched the Iltis during testing and saw that the all-wheel drive was really, really good off-road. And then he thought, if all-wheel drive makes the SUV good off-road, what about a normal sedan? So they stuffed an all-wheel drive system into their 80 series sedan, and sure enough, during testing in German quarries, they found that all-wheel drive made the ordinary family car much easier to drive on loose surfaces, and it made it a lot faster. So, they would use the basic platform from the Audi 80, which spawned some pretty damn good cars on itself, like the RS2 and their IMSA racers. Then they introduced the 2.1-liter 5-cylinder engine, threw a turbocharger on there, making 200 horsepower and 210 foot-pounds of torque. And thanks to the relatively light bodywork of the lack of 1980s crash safety standards, the thing weighed less than 3,000 pounds with the all-wheel drive system. However, the 0 to 60 time was a bit less than you were expecting, because this was the late 1970s and turbo lag was still a big problem. Just ask the Widowmaker 911. But it still did 0 to 60 in 7.1 seconds, which was incredibly fast for the time. And it debuted in 1980 as the first ever all-wheel drive production car, if you exclude the Jensen FF and the AMC Eagle, because those didn't really succeed in the sales department. But it didn't matter what the name was, because handling was excellent. Critics loved the grip from the all-wheel drive vehicle, and since it was so lightweight, you could just chuck it through these corners. And the styling was pretty damn good as well. In fact, it was so good that no changes were made, except for one, which we'll get into in a little bit. The quality was also very, very good, because it was all handmade. And in fact, we actually got the Quattro here in the US, although it had catalytic converters on it, which meant that it made even less power, so lovely emission regulation. I'm getting off track. I mentioned the styling changes, and how they didn't change at all until its discontinuation in the 1990s. Well, there was one change, because remember, the whole reason Audi developed the Quattro in the first place was to see how good an all-wheel drive vehicle would be in the World Rally Championship. There was a problem though. The World Rally Championship prohibited all-wheel drive cars in the rulebook, so Audi tried to change the rules in 1981, and they succeeded, but they missed the Monte Carlo. That didn't really stop them, because when they were given the green light for Sweden, they demolished the competition and humiliated everyone. All the other manufacturers thought that all-wheel drive would be too complex and too heavy for the technical, brutal rally stages, but Audi shut them up good and proper. They won again in Rally San Remo with Michelle Mousson, the first woman to win a World Rally Championship event, and they finished the season off with another win at the RAC Rally. That was a pretty good start, and they got even better when Audi won the Manufacturers' Championship in 1982 outright. It was at this time, with their Audi A1 Group B car, they got into a season-long rivalry with the Lancia 037. And yes, the 037, which was rear-wheel drive, did take the title by 2 points in 1983 over Audi. We've talked about it in the past. That was a bit sneaky and using strategy rather than outright speed to claim the title. But that still meant that a rear-wheel drive car beat the all-wheel drive Quattro, and Audi could not let that happen. Which is why they developed the Sport Quattro. We're going full circle back to that change, that little styling change. You see, the Quattro itself was inherently flawed in its design. It was front-engined, engine being way far in front of the axle, giving it terrible weight distribution and balance. So, they completely redid the design. So, overall, they chopped a whole foot off of the car's length while keeping the wheelbase pretty much the same, drastically improving handling. They also put the engine farther back, closer to the driver, giving it better balance. Then they cut the weight by 800 pounds thanks to Kevlar bodywork and fiberglass, and the engine was upgraded with a more aggressive turbocharger, making 300 horsepower. The road car, which did 0 to 60 in 7 seconds for the original, cut that down by 3 seconds. It was 3 seconds faster 0 to 60 than the original car. That's an incredible amount. And the top speed was now 155 miles an hour. This was a supercar by that standard. Only 224 were ever made, and they were sold at 4 times the price of the original Quattro. But don't worry, because it worked. The homologated Sport Quattro dominated the 1984 World Rally Championship, winning both drivers' and manufacturers' titles. Although even as they were demolishing the 84 season, they were casting nervous glances at a car that was currently in its development year, the Peugeot 205 T16, because it was a hatchback. That was also all-wheel drive, but instead of being front-engined like the Quattro, it was mid-engine, giving it perfect balance. And with a little bit of development and a Formula 1 turbocharger, it demolished Audi in the 1985 season, taking the title. And Lancia responded with the Delta S4, the most powerful WRC car ever devised, with testing ranging up to 1,000 horsepower. Audi needed a response, and somewhere in Audi's food chain of executives, they said more power means more speed means more win. So, they launched the Quattro S1E2. It is, to this day, the most powerful rally car to ever run on a stage. The Delta S4 is the most powerful during testing, the most powerful period, but it never ran the same power as the Quattro on the stage. The Quattro routinely ran 600 horsepower on rally stages, with 700 plus possible from the engine. It could do 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds thanks to the all-wheel drive system and the power shift gearbox, which is basically a predecessor to Volkswagen's current DSGs. And it scored Audi's last ever WRC victory at the 1985 Rally San Remo. And it featured comical aerodynamics, with a massive snow plow at the front, and even massiver wing on the back, because more wing plus more power plus more turbo means more plaster. I love this thing. It's not quite the madness of the Group B cars, but goddamn is it close. Sadly, a series of fatal accidents led Audi to voluntarily withdraw from Group B regulations over safety concerns, and with Audi out of the way, the 205 T16 E2, which had an even bigger F1 turbocharger, won the 1986 title from Lancia. And soon after, Group B was completely cancelled, along with its sister series, Group S. Group S? What the hell is Group... No one said anything about Group S. Group S was basically Group B 2.0, and was slated for the up-and-coming 1988 WRC season. Manufacturers were very tired of having to build a whopping 200 road cars for homologation purposes, so Group S had a homologation purpose of 10. Yep, you only had to build 10 cars for the entire season. And other than that, it was pretty much the same. They thought about limiting the power figures, but they scrapped that idea during the writing up in 1985. And this got manufacturers even more interested. Lancia was entering a twin-turbo 650 horsepower version of the Delta S4. Mazda made a 450 horsepower version of the RX-7 with four-wheel steering. Seat entered a freaking twin engine, that's right, 2 engines in one car, ISBA with 600 horsepower. Even Soviet Russia, in the form of Lada, got involved with a 350 horsepower rear-wheel drive lightweight monster. Audi had a problem though. As their pace was dwindling in 1985, leading up to the launch of the E2, their boss, Piech, decided that it was time to wind down motorsport operations since they weren't winning. So, Audi sports team boss Roland Gumper and their main driver Walter Roll completely ignored everything that he said and started work on a secret Quattro replacement. And I do mean secret, because in order to make sure that no one found out about this car, they snuck across the Iron Curtain into USSR Czechoslovakia. Using a prototype version of the S1E2 as a benchmark, they began developing a new mid-engine supercar based around the Quattro. It had the same all-wheel drive and the same engine, making anywhere from 700 to 1,000 horsepower. It had new composite bodywork and new designs to drop the weight down at just 1,700 pounds or less. The top speed for this Le Mans-looking supercar, it doesn't even look like a rally car, it looks like a supercar designed for the Mulsanne Straits, with a reported top speed of 186 miles an hour on dirt. That sounds terrifying! But just as quickly as the secret project got underway, it ended, because just 2 months into testing, a photographer snuck across the border and photographed the Audi testing site with their new mid-engine car, and plastered it all over the front page of the Austrian newspapers. Piech was so enraged that he ordered every single of the prototypes, codenamed RS-002, to be destroyed for him to inspect, to make sure they didn't sneak. But Gumper was a smart guy, so he told him, when they asked how many were made, quote, "More than one was made." So when all 2 of the test cars were lined up and dismantled, Piech was satisfied. Little did he or the rest of Audi know that one RS-002 survived hiding in Audi's other production center. This secret car was hid away for decades, until it was fully restored in 2016 and placed in Audi's museum, which sounds a little hypocritical, not gonna lie. But with the cancellation of Group B in 1986, and Group S along with it, Audi tried to enter the WRC in 1987 Group A, but it didn't go very well, so they withdrew from all WRC ever since. They did, however, dominate Pikes Peak from 1984 to 1987 with the help of Michel Mouton and Walter Roll, winning it every single year, 1984, 1985, 1986, and 1987, with 700 horsepower S1E2s with crazier aero. I mean, the aerodynamics is simply comical at this point, before the Quattro was completely, finally, retired. Now, several Quattro concepts were made in 1991, 2010, and 2014. In fact, the 1991 Quattro directly led to the Audi R8. But they were scrapped to continue their crossover development, and Audi has since stated that there will never be a new Quattro. It's a shame, because the Quattro quite literally changed the game forever. It made all-wheel drive commonplace on family sedans. Hell, I can't think of a single normal car in current production that does not have an all-wheel drive option. It's a mandatory requirement if you're gonna make money and sell some cars, and Audi pioneered that with the Quattro by putting it in an ordinary car. And if the lack of a new Quattro makes you sad, just look at it and think that every single Audi model ever made since uses full-time Quattro all-wheel drive.